Good morning. صباح الخير سعد سفيرة. سفيرة مي خليل. أو مساء الخير بقى القاهرة. It's المشروع. Good morning. Good morning, ASG. Oscar, how is everything? All is well?
Good morning, Ambassador Osama Abdul Malik. How are you doing? Good morning, Ambassador Ahmed Abdul Latif. Good to see you.
Good morning. Great to see you. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So
well, good afternoon from Cairo.
Yes, it is truly. Good afternoon in Cairo. It's 2:30 now in Cairo. Good morning, Ambassador Mai. Wish you all the best, and I do welcome all the distinguished participants. With your kind permission, we'll start to be punctual. Good afternoon, of course, to the distinguished participants in Cairo and in Tanzania, Dar es Salaam, and elsewhere. I do welcome all of you to that virtual high-level panel discussion on financing for peace building in peacekeeping and transition contexts. Excellencies and distinguished participants, I have the distinct honor to welcome you all to this high-level panel discussion on financing for peace building in peacekeeping and transition contexts. As I said, I also see this opportunity to thank the Honorable PGA, His Excellency Mr. Abdullah Shahid, the current PGA of the UNGA 76 session. And I wish to thank as well my dearest friend, Honorable Assistant Secretary General Oscar Fernandez Tranco, and all the distinguished panelists for accepting the invitation to provide their invaluable insights to our event today. Many thanks extended as well to CCCPA under the able leadership of my dear friend Ambassador Ahmed Al-Latif for all efforts in preparing for our event today, including this excellent working paper that was circulated to all the participants prior to the meeting. Excellencies, Egypt has always been a staunch supporter of the UN peacebuilding architecture. We firmly believe that the UNPBC has a great potential. However, it has not fully realized it, and it is mainly due to the fact that peacebuilding funding is insufficient, unpredictable, and unsustainable. Ensuring adequate, predictable, and sustained financing for peacebuilding remains the most critical challenge facing the peacebuilding architecture. As recognized by the member states in the 2020 Twin Resolution on Peacebuilding and Sustaining Peace. And hence they agreed to convene a GA high-level meeting on financing while committing to pursue action-oriented outcome. Egypt remains fully committed to support all efforts to take this agenda forward through exploring the wide range of options at hand, from voluntary, innovative, to assessed funding. We are convinced that discussion around assessed funding should be central to our collective efforts. Ensuring adequate, predictable, and sustaining financing will remain elusive without considering actions in assessed funding. Excellencies, allow me to say a few words in my capacity as the current chair of the Peacebuilding Commission. Financing for peacebuilding is a priority for the Peacebuilding Commission. In implementing the resolutions on peacebuilding and sustaining peace adopted by the GA and the Security Council in December 2020, the Commission agreed to consider through relevant PBC engagements options for improving financing for peacebuilding with a view to presenting relevant inputs to the high-level meeting of the GA Assembly next year, as I said earlier. The Commission's input will draw on relevant PBC engagements as well as the outcome of relevant initiatives led by member states, such as today's event. For example, during a recent PBC meeting under the theme Enhancing the Leading Role of Women in Peace Building and Sustaining Peace Efforts, the Commission emphasized the importance of promoting dedicated funding for efforts aimed at promoting the full, equal, and meaningful participation of women in peace building. Today's high-level panel discussion focuses on an area of great importance for the work of the PBC. The Commission has, over the last years, supported several countries to overcome the risks of transitioning from one form of UN presence to another. In the absence of adequate and predictable funding, countries face the risk of going over a financing cliff, as funding for peace building normally drops precisely at a moment when national authorities and communities assume increased responsibilities for security and peace building. This is why discussions like the one we're having today can further underscore the centrality of peace building and the need to ensure adequate, predictable, and sustained financing for peace building activities, especially in peacekeeping and transition settings. I wish all of us a very productive dialogue today, and I know that we have circulated the agenda and the work program of today. We look forward to very rich discussions indeed. I wish to once again to thank the Honorable PGA for accepting to be with us via a recorded message, and to express deep appreciation to the Honorable Minister of Foreign Affairs and Eastern African Cooperation of Tanzania, Her Excellency Liberata Mulamula, and all the distinguished panelists who will be with us in the different segments of today's event conceptual. Now we will be listening to the recorded message of the Honorable PGA.
Your Excellency Usama Abdul Khalaq, Permanent Representative of Egypt to the United Nations and Chair of the Peacebuilding Commission. Mr. Oscar Fernandez Taranco, Assistant Secretary General for Peacebuilding Support. Excellencies, UN peace operations remain one of our organization's most effective tools for protecting vulnerable communities and for reducing violence within and between states. This is especially true today, owing to the deepening linkages between peacekeeping and peace building. The increasing emphasis on peace building and sustainability is among the most significant conceptual shifts within the United Nations to date. It provides us with one of the most comprehensive strategies ever devised for establishing a truly lasting peace. Peace building goes beyond directly preventing armed conflict. It seeks to understand and address the root causes and dynamics that make host countries more conflict-prone. It aims to build up their political institutions and processes, including those relating to elections, law and order, and security sector reform. It provides host countries with the stability and capacities to build and sustain their own peace. These efforts complement both the vision outlined in the Secretary General's Action for Peace Plus and his call in the Our Common Agenda report. For stronger commitments and investments in prevention and peace building. Excellencies, as we speak, peacekeepers around the world continue to work towards preventing conflict, protecting vulnerable communities, and helping to strengthen countries' socio-political frameworks. I commend the thousands of brave women and men who continue to serve as peace builders, especially during these difficult times, with all the challenges entailed by the pandemic. Let us match their courage with our support, especially our financial support. And let us make sure that such financial support is prioritized towards countries that need it most, countries in critical transition phases, where United Nations peacekeeping missions are scaling down. Too often, the closure of a United Nations mission within a country coincides with reduced and irregular aid flows. This jeopardizes their ability to take their long-term peace and security into their own hands. While I applaud the Peacebuilding Fund's efforts to partially close these gaps, I recognize that much more is needed. In that regard, I will convene a high-level meeting of the General Assembly this session that will contribute to advancing United Nations reforms and forge more coordinated responses to crisis situations. This will, I hope, accelerate our implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals, including peace, justice, and strong institutions. For as stated in the preamble of the 2030 Agenda, there can be no sustainable development without peace, and no peace without sustainable development. I expect that member states will use this opportunity to generate concrete solutions on how we can ensure predictable and sufficient funding for peace-building efforts. I appeal to all member states and the international community to reaffirm their confidence in the Peacebuilding Fund and translate their commitments into meaningful support. Excellencies, a just and lasting peace will always remain the central mission of the United Nations, and peace builders are vital to the success of that mission. Their efforts continue to prove hope to communities all over the world who aspire to leave conflict and its ugly legacies behind. Rest assured that during my presidency of hope, I will do all that I can to support their important work. I thank you.
On your behalf, of course, I wish to express deep appreciation to the Honorable PGA for this very rich input and for his encouragement and for his intention to organize the high-level meeting as well. And now I wish to give the floor to my greatest friend, His Excellency G. Oscar Fernandez Tranco, a founding father of the whole PBA. This might be one of his last meetings in his official capacity. Of course, I'm pretty confident that we will have too many opportunities in the future to continue to cooperate, to give us his views, inputs, and to take us through this very important debate we're having today. Oscar has a lot in his mind. He has always applied his great mind and wisdom, supporting and making all the peace building architecture a story of great success and functionality. I'm a great admirer of him, as we have been trying in the last few meetings to bid farewell for him, but this is not the farewell remark. I give you the floor, my dearest friend, Oscar. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Hossam Abdel Malik, for your very kind words and for your kind introduction. And also let me thank Ambassador Ahmed Abdel Latif and all the excellencies and distinguished participants in this event. Let me start by thanking Egypt and the Cairo International Center for Conflict Resolution, Peacekeeping and Peacebuilding for convening this discussion. Let me start by highlighting 6 remarkable milestones for peacebuilding in the recent years. The first is the 2016 and 2020 twin resolutions on peacebuilding and sustaining peace, which provided a comprehensive framework embraced by the member states and the whole UN across the peace, development, humanitarian, and human rights areas of work. The second is the Secretary General's reforms aimed at strengthening the holistic approaches so that we are better able to support countries at risks of experiencing or transitioning out of conflict. The third is through the Action for Peacekeeping, there is much stronger recognition of the contribution of peacekeeping to peace building and sustaining peace, and emphasis on UN integration. The fourth is we have redoubled efforts to improve UN transitions, to accompany national transitions, and prevent relapses into conflict, culminating in the Security Council Resolution 2594 on transitions, which was just approved last month, and which also built on the very important presidential statement in the Security Council that Egypt shepherded back in 2017. The fifth is the working in synergy. The PBC and the PBF have supported the multidisciplinary and multi-stakeholder solutions that cut across the silos in broader geographical and thematic areas. Facilitating transitions is a major priority. The Peacebuilding Fund, the Secretary General's Peacebuilding Fund, which is is allocating the largest share of its annual investments, some 35%, to go to these contexts under the current PBF strategy. And the sixth, and important, we see much greater convergence with development actors and financial institutions, with the World Bank, the regional development banks, and now to the IMF, developing strategies and tools to address fragility and build resilience. And here, just let me acknowledge the very important role that Frank Bousquet, one of the key speakers of this event, has played in actually creating this more synergistic partnership and this visionary framing of the policy frameworks that allows both institutions, the World Bank and the IMF, to become further engaged in this very important area of work. However, as underscored by the 2020 twin resolutions and the General Assembly decision to convene a high-level meeting on financing for peace building, when it comes to this most critical enabler of peace building and sustaining peace, the challenge remains. Demand for peace building financing far outstrips the supply. We face a mismatch between the rhetoric and the reality. This financing challenge has been identified as particularly acute during mission transitions and drawdowns, the so-called financial cliff. We have established a dedicated transition financing window within the Secretary General's Peacebuilding Fund precisely to address this major gap and urgent need. Innovative approaches, for example, the state liaison functions in Darfur, showed the complementarity in use of peacekeeping programmatic funding and the Peacebuilding Fund, and how they can actually provide and incentivize UN integration and allow at least some continuity of peacebuilding activities once the mission withdraws. But this is clearly not sufficient. So what are the concrete outcomes that we need to work towards between now and the General Assembly high-level meeting? First, it is time that we made a bold and concrete step toward ensuring adequate, predictable, and sustained financing for the Peacebuilding Fund, which is the UN's instrument of first resort to support peacebuilding activities. As highlighted by the Secretary General during last week's PBC meeting on our common agenda, by continuing to rely mainly on voluntary and extra budgetary contributions, we shy away from recognizing that prevention and peacebuilding are structural and central objectives of the United Nations, which are enshrined in the Charter. The SG's recommendation to allocate a dedicated amount of 100 million to the Peacebuilding Fund from assessed contributions would be a powerful signal regarding the universal commitment of member states. So additional and more predictable funding would enable the United Nations to develop early resource mobilization strategies with national partners during transitions. The second is that beyond Peacebuilding Fund and peacekeeping, we can continue to place emphasis on peacebuilding through the budgets of the UN agencies, funds, and programs, and the support of bilateral and multilateral donors. A greater share of ODA should be committed to peacebuilding in conflict-affected territories. While not a panacea, and the private sector can play a role, it will take time, expertise, flexibility, and hands-on engagement to develop innovative financing solutions that can contribute to peacebuilding outcomes. The third is I encourage you to continue to leverage the role of the Peacebuilding Commission. And here, Mr. Chair, you've been playing a very dynamic leadership role to foster coherence and bring together actors across the United Nations system and beyond. The Peacebuilding Commission has provided advice to the Security Council and helped mobilize international support and resources around national peacebuilding priorities before, during, and after transitions. For example, in the case of Liberia and Sierra Leone. As highlighted by the Secretary General in our common agenda, more resources are needed to support and expand the role for the Peacebuilding Commission. The World Bank's Fragility, Conflict, and Violence strategy and the growth of its accompanying financial instruments are game-changing here. I am also very encouraged by the shifts inside the IMF to refine its approach and better reflect inclusion and social protection. And again, here, the leadership of Frank Bousquet has been stellar. These partnerships must continue to deepen, building on increased collaboration at the country level and efforts to better link the Peacebuilding Commission, the international financial institutions, including their executive boards. And finally, Mr. Chair, COVID-19 has further stretched resources and capacities, disproportionately impacting conflict-affected settings, and we are already facing the climate security risks. Under these circumstances, we need to collectively redouble and support nationally owned and inclusive peacebuilding priorities and national capacities. We should integrate peacebuilding into recovery plans and policies to ensure that we actually do build back better with more resilient, peaceful, just, and inclusive societies. And with this, I wish to thank you for this opportunity to contribute to this very, very important debate. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We couldn't have a better introductory remark. You have provided us with a lot of interesting and extremely rich inputs and food for thought for the coming sessions. We will have like 3 consecutive sessions moderated by consecutively by both Ambassador Ahmed Al-Latif, Chair of the CCCPA, and my dearest sister, Ambassador Mai Khalil, the Deputy Assistant Minister for UN Affairs in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Egypt, whom I congratulate her for assuming her responsibilities and wishing her all the best as well. And then we will have like an open discussions after those 3 consecutive sessions. Over to you, my dearest friend, Ambassador Ahmed Al-Latif, to moderate the first session. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, and let me join you in welcoming all our distinguished panelists and participants to this virtual high-level panel, and to thank in particular yourself for your valuable support in organizing this virtual panel, as well as the President of the General Assembly for his message, and the Assistant Secretary General Oscar Fernandez Taranco for his valuable remarks that set the stage also for our discussion today. And this virtual panel, also I wish to point out, is part of our preparations for the next edition of the Aswan Forum for Sustainable Peace and Development. And the Aswan Forum has had the issue of peace building and financing of peace building as one of its core themes over its different editions. But without further delay, we want to let's move to this first sequence. As you mentioned, the distinguished Ambassador Abdel Khalek, ahead of this meeting, we commissioned a working paper on financing for peace building in peace operations and transition contexts, as to serve as an input in this discussion. The paper maps efforts by the United Nations and partner organizations, especially also the IFIs, in the context of increasing financing for peace building since the adoption of the twin resolutions in 2016 that you have mentioned. And the paper is also intended to provide also the Peacebuilding Commission with some food for thought in the perspective of the high-level debate of the General Assembly on the financing of peace building. So the paper outlines a number of key developments relating to financing of peace building in the United Nations, the key features of the landscape on financing of peace building, and it provides a number of practical recommendations on how to optimize the use of existing financial resources and how to operationalize the recommendations of the Secretary General in terms of providing the Peacebuilding Fund with access to assessed contributions. And I'd like to now give the floor to the author of this paper, Eugene Chen. I would like to thank him for taking on this assignment at quite a short notice, and for really producing a paper that really does a great job at mapping the landscape and the challenges we face, and also puts forward some recommendations for food for thought. Eugene is a visiting scholar at the New York University Center on International Cooperation, and is an expert on international public administration and peacekeeping financing. He has served several roles in the UN Secretariat, including in the Executive Office of the Secretary General. And prior to that, he worked at the US mission to the United Nations as a lead negotiator on a range of subjects, including peacekeeping financing. Thank you again, Eugene, and over to you.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Abdel Latif, for the kind introduction, and also for the invitation to help prepare this paper for this panel and to contribute to the discussion. Since Mr. Fernandez-Tranco has already outlined the policy landscape and discussed the perennial under-resourcing of peace-building activities, I'll go straight into an overview of the existing financing landscape, particularly in the Secretariat. But I think it's important first to establish a bit of context for the current moment. The peace operations landscape has changed significantly since the adoption of the 2016 twin resolutions on peacebuilding and sustaining peace. Compared to 5 years ago, peacekeeping is now in a bit of a decline. In 2016, for example, peacekeeping budgets totaled $8.3 billion. Until that point, much of the focus of member states was on mission startup. And when discussing transitions, most interlocutors at the UN were describing the rehatting of African-led peace operations into UN peacekeeping missions. Whereas today, the total has actually now fallen $2 billion to $6.3 billion for peacekeeping across all the missions. And transition is still the focus of many discussions, but it means something very, very different today. Instead, special political missions have become the preferred method of responding to peace and security challenges. And over the same period, SPM budgets have increased 30% from $561 million to $730 million today. Now, events in the past year have clearly demonstrated how fragile the achievements of a peacekeeping mission can be, and how quickly conflict can potentially relapse in contexts following the departure of a peacekeeping mission. So this not only demonstrates the importance of peace building activities that are done prior to the departure of a mission, but also the need of ensuring that sufficient funding for peace building activities is still available after a mission has completed its mandate. Before going any further, I want to do a quick word on terminology that I use in the presentation and also in the report. And that is, first of all, that I use the term peace operations to refer collectively to peacekeeping and to field-based special political missions. And I use the term programmatic funding to refer to the non-staff related costs for the implementation of mandated tasks in peace operations budgets, such as in the area of rule of law and electoral assistance. In this paper that was commissioned, I focused primarily on funding sources within the Secretariat, given the kind of the subject of this particular discussion, but also because these are the types of funding sources for which the General Assembly, the Security Council, and the PBC have the greatest influence, and which therefore might be particularly relevant for the consideration of inputs into the forthcoming high-level meeting on peacebuilding financing. Of course, there are other significant sources of expertise, capacity, relationships, and funding outside the Secretariat, whether within the agency's funds and programs, including the World Bank and IMF, or in regional organizations. And you'll definitely be hearing more about some of these from some of the speakers who will be discussing later today. Now, as you'll see, the funding landscape within the Secretariat alone is already quite fragmented, and most of the different sources can essentially be categorized into three buckets. The first are trust funds managed centrally at headquarters. A second category are the trust funds that are managed at the mission level. And the third is basically funding within the assessed peace operations budgets. Amongst the first category, the trust funds essentially managed at headquarters, the PBF is obviously the best known, especially for participants in today's discussion. But there are, of course, other trust funds managed at headquarters that have also been used to fund similar activities for some time. Now, each of these was established at different times under different circumstances. And they include, for example, the Trust Fund for Human Security, the UN Democracy Fund, and also the Peace and Security Sub-Fund of the Peace and Development Trust Fund. Now, each of these trust funds is managed in isolation, and each has different governance arrangements, different processes for considering and improving projects, different funding thresholds, and different approaches to fundraising. And some are exclusively or predominantly funded by a single donor. In contrast, we also have a lot of trust funds managed at the mission level primarily by peacekeeping missions. These basically are used to support peace building, stabilization, or other programmatic activities. And again, the origins and approaches to these trust funds managed at the mission level can vary considerably, particularly in the degree of meaningful national ownership. I'll touch upon three really briefly during this the next few minutes. In the DRC, for example, the multi-donor Stabilization Coordination Fund, which was established in 2015, is part of the International Security and Stabilization Support Strategy in support of the National Stabilization and Reconstruction Program. And its board is co-chaired by both the MONUSCO, DSRSG Resident Coordinator, Humanitarian Coordinator, as well as the National Minister of Planning. In South Sudan, the Reconciliation, Stabilization, and Resilience Trust Fund, which was established in 2018, is geared at targeting hotspot areas in the most fragile and marginalized areas of the country. Its programmatic framework kind of takes its cues from the Sustainable Development Coordination Framework for South Sudan, which is signed with government, and its steering committee is chaired by the triple-headed DSRSG RCHC, but also includes representatives from major donors and also from the NGO community. A third example is the Trust Fund in Support of Peace and Security in Mali, which was established in 2014. Here, the Project Review Committee is chaired by the DSRSG RCHC of MINUSMA. Now, in addition to funding peace-building type activities, this trust fund in Mali is used by MINUSMA to also promote integration and coherence within the UN system. For example, members of the country team can only access funds through the trust fund when they partner with organizational units within MINUSMA. And the project review process also provides a means by which to apply the human rights due diligence policy to some of the UN country team activities as relevant. Now, for each of these trust funds, the technical secretariat is located within the peacekeeping mission underneath the DSRSG RCHC. And this placement allows for greater linkages with the agency's funds and programs of the country team. But in Mali, this also fosters some programmatic synergy with other units that also fall under the DSRSG RCHC, such as the security sector reform and DDR components, electoral affairs, and also justice and corrections. Finally, we have the third bucket on assessed contributions. Currently, the majority of the assessed contributions that go towards peace building financing come in the form of programmatic activities. And in the current budget, the Secretary General requested a total of 194 million for programmatic activities. Now, most of this, about 73%, was for mine action, but the remainder, about 51 million, was for activities in the areas of rule of law, DDR, community violence reduction, electoral assistance, etc. However, it's important to note that in some of the missions like MINUSMA that do have their own trust funds, the amount of funding that's available through assessed programmatic funding is actually far less than what's available through mission managed trust funds. Now, although a lot of the major financial contributors have long been wary of potential overlap between mission programmatic funding and the activities of country teams, the funding available through mission budgets for programmatic activities dates back at least to the 1990s with the emergence of multidimensional peacekeeping missions. And over the past decade, the General Assembly itself has increasingly accepted the practice of allowing UN country team members to access assessed programmatic activities to implement projects in support of mission mandated activities. This has been particularly useful in transition contexts where staff departures from the mission during the drawdown period can actually leave missions without sufficient capacity to implement all of their programmatic activities in the final year of operations. A novel application of this, which I assume you will probably hear about more later, was in Darfur, in which assessed programmatic funding was allocated to agencies, funds, and programs through the state liaison functions in support of transition activities. Now, programmatic activities are a staple of multidimensional peacekeeping missions, but they're almost unheard of in SPMs. This has led to many incorrectly assuming that SPMs are not permitted to use programmatic funding. In fact, there are no legislative or regulatory prohibitions on the use of assessed programmatic fundings by SPMs. But there are many reasons why they're not generally included in SPM budgets. Some of these reasons are bureaucratic. For example, before the implementation of the Secretary General's management reforms in 2019, there were different divisions within the Controller's Office responsible for managing peacekeeping budgets and SPM budgets. And over successive decades, this separation led to divergent practices in budget preparation and presentation. That said, it's notable that $1 million in programmatic funding was requested and approved for UNITAMs in 2021, though this was framed as an exceptional measure for the transition, and the request was not included in the budgets that are being considered by the Fifth Committee right now. Now, having presented this overview of the fragmented financing landscape within the Secretariat, the paper also provides a few recommendations on how to most effectively utilize existing sources of funding. One of the recommendations is that perhaps the PBC itself could take the lead on establishing some principles to kind of bring a little bit of order to the chaos that exists. So for example, such principles could include a clarity on what types of activities should be requested and delivered through assessed programmatic funding versus mission managed trust funds. They could, for example, also suggest the prioritization of the use of centrally managed trust funds for projects in non-mission settings or for cross-border type issues. And there can also be some sort of encouragement of more communications between missions and trust fund secretariats, possibly through the shared regional structure to better coordinate projects and programmatic activities to avoid duplication and to promote complementarity. There are also a number of recommendations related to the improvement of budget presentation. A major source of the funding cliff is actually the lack of coordination within donor governments, where oftentimes there are different ministries or organizational units that are responsible for contributions to peace operations and contributions to the agency's funds and programs. And therefore, providing greater information to member states about the totality of requirements in individual country contexts can actually allow them to better plan and prepare for a shifting of funding from peace operations to country teams over the course of a transition. But this would require the Secretariat to do a better job of presenting mission budgets in a manner that's actually useful to member states. For example, currently mission budgets oftentimes focus on cherry-picking individually highlighted performance measures or on outputs rather than outcomes. And costs are presented on the basis of categories, groups, or objects of expenditures, such as salaries or construction costs or air transport. This lets member states measure what money is being spent on, but doesn't provide a real basis for understanding how budgets are actually being used in support of individual mandated tasks. So the Secretariat could be asked to provide a thematic breakdown of mission budgets based on sectors such as rule of law, DDR, electoral affairs, etc. And then this breakdown could then be presented in context of the total United Nations system activities and expenditures across those thematic areas. But there's also a lot more that can be done to increase coherence of activities at the country level by the UN itself. Missions need to better coordinate their activities with those of the country team to maximize impact, particularly in transition settings. Now, the existing mechanism for this, which is the Integrated Strategic Framework, or ISF, is supposed to be the mechanism through which the UN establishes common priorities and divisions of responsibilities for peace consolidation activities in integrated settings. However, in practice, the creation of the ISF is oftentimes treated as a box-checking exercise. In fact, there are structural disincentives for different parts of the UN system that push them away from cooperation, because there is inherent competition between entities for resources, visibility, and prestige. And therefore, a lot of additional attention and some pressure from member states may be necessary in order to promote greater coherence. To provide the ISF with teeth, for example, it could be linked more to funding and serve as the starting point for mission budget preparation and agency resource mobilization efforts. And this would also take into account a decade of experience that shows that providing the country team with access to mission funds can be an important driver of programmatic coherence at the country level. Finally, I also want to touch upon the different ways that can be used to operationalize the proposal to provide the PBF with access to assessed contributions. The importance of providing the PBF with more predictable and sustainable funding is evident. Assessed contributions can provide such an avenue and are particularly appropriate in this context because much of the support required through the PBF is in fact to support mission transition contexts and to help mitigate the impact of the financial cliff that can result from the departure of peacekeeping missions. There are actually really no technical obstacles to operationalizing the proposals made by the Secretary General originally back in 2018. What has been missing to date is political will. So to kind of wrap up my presentation, I want to draw the attention of participants to a number of precedents that can serve as potential models to consider for how, in fact, member states can actually operationalize these proposals. For example, funding the peacekeeping share proposed by the SG can be done in the same manner that currently the support account, the United Nations logistics base, and the regional service center in Entebbe are funded. Currently, each of these, each mission is charged prorated share of the cost of each of these budgets, and the contribution to the Peacebuilding Fund can be channeled and added in much the same way. Now, funding an SPM share of assessed contributions can be done in similar manner as the subventions that are currently given from the regular budget to the extraordinary chambers of the courts of Cambodia or the residual special court for Sierra Leone. Now, if member states would rather consider funding from the PBF separate from peacekeeping and special political mission budgets, they can also take inspiration for the standalone approach that was used to finance the ICTY and ICTR, and which is currently used for the International Residual Mechanism for Criminal Tribunals. And an element of this approach that may be of interest to some member states is the fact that costs for the IRM-CT are apportioned using a combination of both the regular and peacekeeping scales of assessment. I'll stop there, but I hope that the paper and my briefing helps establish at least a common basis of understanding of the existing funding landscape within the Secretariat and perhaps provide some inspiration and food for thought for considerations of what types of recommendations or inputs to be able to contribute to the upcoming high-level meeting on peacebuilding financing. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Eugene. I think you did a great job in presenting the paper, particularly providing the overview of this fragmented financing landscape. You mentioned the different trust funds, both at the Secretariat level, at the missions level, and the dynamics relating to the use of funds under these different mechanisms. But also you highlighted a number of options and recommendations to address the situation, going from the role of the eventually a role for the PBC in terms of establishing greater clarity through elaborating maybe a number of principles, also greater improvement in the clarity of budget presentation at the country level, the interplay between the missions and the country teams, the UN, how to better connect them, and finally the important issue of how the PBF assess contributions. And I think you pointed to a number of interesting precedents. Again, just to clarify that this paper is by the author. Again, we just wanted to have some food for thought and provide an overview that could be useful, as Eugene just mentioned, to establish a common base for the discussion and for the different panelists to comment upon and to help provide a useful input to enrich our discussion. So thank you again, Eugene. Thank you again for preparing this paper in a relatively short notice. And without further delay, I'll give the floor now to my dear colleague and Her Excellency Ambassador May Khalil, Deputy Assistant Minister for United Nations Affairs. And let me also congratulate you on your new position and already thank you for all the support and cooperation with the Cairo Center that is very important for our work. And over to you for the next sequence. Thank you.
Hello. Your Excellency, you're on mute.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Good morning and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you so much, Ambassador Ahmed, for your greeting and your welcoming remarks. Thank you also, Ambassador Osama, for the very warm greeting. This is the first panel discussion that I attend on my new capacity as the Deputy Assistant Minister of Foreign Affairs for UN Affairs. And actually, just by listening to the previous speakers, I've learned so much in just a few minutes. This panel is going to discuss peacekeeping, peace-building financing challenges and gaps and opportunities. I think given the increasing strain on financing for peace building, especially in light of the COVID-19 pandemic and with the donors shifting their responses towards recovery efforts, I think there is a bigger need for finding innovative and creative ways to explore new ways to find means of financing for peace building and missions. Now, let me introduce our speakers. Unfortunately, we were unable to, Her Excellency Minister Liberata Mulamala, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Tanzania, will not be able to attend to join us today. Let me introduce our two panelists, Mr. Frank Busquet, sorry. I'm sorry, I really apologize if I butchered the names in pronouncing them, so I'm so sorry. Deputy Director, International Monetary Fund, and also Dr. Yero Balde, Director, Transition States Coordination Office, African Development Bank. Let me start by Mr. Busquet. The International Monetary Fund is strengthening in engagement in peace building and in conflict-affected settings through its collaboration with the UN and other IFIs, as well as by currently developing its new strategy on fragile and conflict-affected states. Taking into account the 2018 IMF report on IMF in fragile states, the UN IMF WBG policy dialogue in 2019, and the 4 country-focused dialogues conducted in May and June 2020, how has the IMF adapted its modalities for engagement in fragile and conflict-affected settings? In connection to that, in what ways have these findings affected partnerships that the fund engages in with regards to financing for peace-building activities? Could you also share with us more insights on the IMF's prospective engagements in FCS over the next 3 years in light of the new strategy that is being developed, especially with regards to adapting current financing instrument for peace building activities? Mr. Busquet?
Right, very, very good. Well, first, thank you very much, Ambassador Mekhalil. I would also like to thank Ambassador Abdelatek, Ambassador Osama Abdelatif. Thank you also Egypt and the International Center for Conflict Resolution, Peacekeeping and Peacebuilding for organizing this important event. So 2 quick points. Why is it so important? Well, first, because clearly countries impacted by fragility and conflict have a real risk of divergence between them and the rest of the world following the COVID-19. Our recent numbers shows that when you look at the impact of the COVID-19, today, fragile and conflict-affected states were hit hard. Real GDP contracted by about 6.6% last year, with public debt that increased the same year by 12.6%. If you look at in terms of inflation, basically on all key indicators, it also increased by more than 10% for those countries in 2021. So the topic of countries, impacted by fragility and conflict is obviously very important. It was important before COVID-19. Today, it's even more important. And this is clearly not a good news for the prevention and the whole sustaining peace agenda, obviously, but this also means that we need to step up our efforts at all levels, and I will come back to it. So sustaining peace prevention is obviously very important for the whole international community. And for the IMF, it is clear that fragility and conflict are macro-critical. Fragile states represent about 20% of our membership at the fund, which is significant. And this is why also we are scaling up our support to those countries, and I will come back later on. In addition, it's also important to say that, like an epidemic, fragility and conflict can spread to neighboring countries and regions through forced displacement flows, transborder security, conflict dynamics that can really destabilize entire regions. So it's not just a question of focusing on 20% of our membership, but it's actually recognizing the spillover effect and the fact it's important to focus on what is global public good for the international community. So for the fund, it's very clear, fragility and conflict are macro-critical. Fragility and conflict obviously impose heavy human cost, but also affect countries' balance of payment position, distorting good policies and disrupting financial flows. Fragility and conflict undermine the development of productive resources of those countries, leaving those countries with very few options to correct balance of payment disequilibria. So how the IMF can help in this context to respond to your questions, Ambassador? First, helping countries to build and strengthen macroeconomic institutions that have actually a key role to play to sustainable and inclusive growth. The IMF does not play a direct role financing a peacekeeping transition context, but the fund engagement helps countries restore macroeconomic stability and promote inclusive growth, therefore enabling countries' path towards recovery from fragility. We have significant support in terms of capacity development. Why is it important? Because it's actually focused on core operational issue, basic revenue administration function, budget execution and control, developing bank regulation, strengthening central bank, improving statistical capacity. Why is it important? Because strong institutions responsible for macroeconomic stability and inclusive economic growth are actually essential to help countries impacted by fragility and conflict exit from fragility and promoting resilience. Second area where the fund can help, obviously, it's in terms of financing. I would like to say that the fund financing has a very clear role designed to fill protracted or short-term balance of payment needs. And since the start of the COVID-19, actually the IMF has provided those countries impacted by fragility and conflict with emergency financing or disbursement totaling about $7 billion. More than 21 countries impacted by fragility and conflict have also benefited from the debt service relief under the Catastrophe Containment and Relief Trust, which is about $480 million to date. In addition, about $16 billion of the recent special drawing right allocation already went to fragile states, boosting their foreign exchange reserve, supporting external stability, but also creating space where appropriate for additional urgent spending. And last but not least, this financing is not important by itself, but it's also very catalytic that allows later on a significant increase in terms of ODA to those countries impacted by fragility and conflict. The third bucket, so we have the first one is about key institutions to ensure that we have the basic right to promote inclusive growth and strengthen resilience. Second aspect is financing with the key point, which is about being catalytic. And the third area, we are also scaling up our support as was rightly mentioned by other panelists in terms of developing a specific strategy to support those countries impacted by fragility and conflict. And when I talk about strategy, it's not just a paper, it's with specific measures. So the whole point about this strategy is to strengthen our engagement with those countries to ensure that macroeconomic policy advice, program design, capacity development are really adjusted and take fully into account the whole key drivers of fragility and conflict. This also means under the strategy that we are enhancing, and that's a proposal that is included in the proposed strategy, the fund presence on the ground to really engage in a more regular manner with authorities and with partners, which makes a last point I would like to mention is about the fact that the strategy recognizes the importance of partnership with actors that have different mandates based on a clear division of labor and leveraging all the comparative advantage. Partnerships with key actors are critical, no single organization can succeed. This includes with the United Nations, with the MDBs, with the regional development banks. That includes the World Bank, the Africa Development Bank. I'm so pleased to see the presence of Hierro Balde here, with whom we have been partnering for many years. And I would like also actually to thank Oscar Fernandez Taramco. It's his last week under his current functions, and I would like to really recognize the role that Oscar has played during all the past years on the whole peacebuilding agenda. Oscar has paved the road clearly, and it has been instrumental, allowing the partnership with many, with the World Bank and with the IMF today on the whole peacebuilding agenda. Oscar's strategic leadership has allowed IFI to speak the same language, but also ensure that key topics such as prevention or the importance of tailoring our support and fully taking into account key drivers of fragility is now almost a common language across many IFI, of course, leveraging their own mandate. So Oscar, I would like to thank you for all the excellent work and creating the space for other institutions, for the World Bank, but also now that I am in the IMF, to really partner and be always in listening mode. So conclusion, I would like just to mention, as was noted by our managing director, Kristalina Georgieva, in a recent annual meeting event, that supporting fragile states is a moral, economic, and security imperative. At the IMF, as you can see, we're stepping up our efforts, leveraging different instruments and focusing on tailoring our support to the key manifestation of fragility and conflict, but also enhancing our partnership, recognizing that humanitarian development, peace actors have a key role to play, and that helps us to better inform our engagement. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bousquet. Now, I would like to address Dr. Balde. Dr. Balde, in recent years, the African Development Bank has been a key actor in engaging in fragile and conflict-affected settings in the African context. The bank's strategy addressing fragility and building resilience in Africa has been key in sustaining its engagement in transition states. Accordingly, in light of the COVID-19 responses and the recent evaluation of the strategy, how is the bank leveraging on its capacities to mobilize different financing tools for peace-building activities in various transition contexts in Africa?
Thank you very much. Chairman, Ambassador Abdelrazek, Excellencies, distinguished participants, all protocols observed. Allow me to start by thanking Ambassador Mekali for her kind introduction, and my fellow panelist, Frank, for his insightful contribution. So congratulations to me also on your recent appointment. On behalf of the African Development Bank, I would like to express our deep gratitude to Ambassador Abdel Latif also for supporting our excellent collaboration under the Aswan Forum for Sustainable Peace and Development, as well as his recent participation in the bank's Africa Resilience Forum last September. I would also like to express my appreciation to Assistant Secretary General Oscar Fernandez for our strong collaboration with the Peace Building Support Office and our ongoing joint fragility and resilience assessment in the Mano River Union, together with the Mano River Union Secretariat. All this showcases that we have come far over the past few years, as Frank rightly mentioned, in reinforcing our partnerships to address fragility and foster resilience in Africa. There is, however, still a long way to go. With over 250 million Africans affected by fragility and conflict, Africa hosting over 29 million forcibly displaced due to conflicts and climate change, over 12 million African youth entering the labor markets each year without finding decent jobs, and evasive gender equality challenges. These challenges are compounded by the rising insecurity in hotspot regions such as the Sahel, the Lake Chad Basin, and the Horn of Africa, largely involving non-state-based conflicts targeting civilians through terrorist attacks, insurgencies, and intercommunal conflicts. This has led many African governments to increase their expenditure on security, diverting resources away from development and putting an unsustainable pressure on their national budgets. For example, military spending in the G5 Sahel countries reached an annual average of $1.31 billion between 2014 and 2019, which is 2.5 times the level of the 1998 to 2013 period. These manifestations highlight the need to build regional stability through effective conflict resolution and peace building, especially at the community level. The COVID-19 pandemic has particularly exacerbated economic instability, poverty, inequality, and exclusion, just like Frank mentioned earlier. Many transition states recorded weak economic performance in 2020. The measures implemented in response to the COVID-19 pandemic have caused large gross financing needs in most transition states, reducing their fiscal space and raising their debt levels. For instance, while average debt to GDP for the continent was 60% in 2019, this is projected to rise to 75% by the end of 2021. This underscores the need to support national capacity to manage debt and ensure quality investments. It also calls for enhanced domestic resource mobilization because, as we know, domestic resources are the most predictable and sustainable sources of financing for peace building. The lack of resources in translating into finance is translating into financing gaps for peace building and sustaining peace in transition contexts. Despite this challenging environment, we trust that there are still pathways and opportunities for building resilience in Africa. We need to harness these opportunities and unlock the potential of the continent, specifically for the vulnerable communities, to yield peace-building dividends, achieve stability, inclusive, and sustainable development. I will now discuss in a concrete manner the African Development Bank's role in mobilizing and leveraging different financing tools for peace-building activities in transition contexts in Africa. Over the past year and a half, the African Development Bank has been working on a new fragility and resilience strategy for the period 2022 to 2026. This strategy relies on the bank's 20-year engagement, lessons learned, and extensive analytical work on fragility, as well as its increasingly sophisticated understanding of its drivers. Under this strategy, which is still under development, the African Development Bank is seeking to scale up its efforts towards addressing fragility and building resilience, grounded in its comparative advantages, with a prioritized focus on strengthening institutional capacities, building resilient societies, and 3, catalyzing private investments in fragile settings. Prevention is a central tenet in this new strategy. For this end, a fit-for-purpose financing architecture is being proposed, which emphasizes the need to increase the synergy between the bank group's several financing instruments. Peace-building financing requires not just sufficient resources, but the right combinations of instruments. In the past years, the bank has diversified its instruments, creating a suite of options for engaging in fragile contexts. The bank will continue working with its strategic partners to leverage additional resources, including from the private sector, in recognition of the important role that the private sector can play in building stability and resilience across the continent, including fragile markets. Since 2008, the bank has established a special financing vehicle called Transition Support Facility to provide additional financing and operational flexibility to address root causes of fragility and build resilience. Use of the funds under this facility is informed by the systematic application of the fragility lens in the design and implementation of projects financed under it. For this end, the facility has been instrumental in supporting policy-based operations, capacity building, and investments for reconstruction and rehabilitation and social building that typically accompany the period following conflict and crisis and critical for peace building in transition contexts. Through the policy-based operations, the bank has been able to provide quick and flexible support in moments of crisis, support core public functions, and peace building and state building processes. This is aligned with Frank's point on institutional strengthening. The Transition Support Facility also provides funding for countries with chronic areas and plays a crucial role to foster dialogue with national authorities around policy reforms, leading to the lifting of sanctions and the normalization of relationship with international financial community. In this context, it has clearly demonstrated a strong effectiveness through its recent successful support to historical debt relief operations in Somalia in 2020 and Sudan in 2021. Over the past few years, the Transition Support Fund has provided more than $3.8 billion additional financing for countries in fragile situations. And over this period, the bank's operations in Transition Support Facility eligible countries secured electricity access to over 6 million people and supplied improved water and sanitation to 21 million people, of which about 10.5 million are women, just to illustrate the impact it is making on the ground. Moreover, the bank has set up several multi-donor trust funds as an important instrument of assistance, particularly in fragile situations. Multi-donor trust funds offer a number of advantages, just like the study, the findings revealed. These include a common platform for policy dialogue, coherent program management, reduced transaction costs, transparency, and improved risk management. A typical example from the bank is the multi-partner Somalia Infrastructure Fund, established by the bank in October 2016 as a special window of the bank's transition support facility, with the key objectives of supporting Somalia to develop and rehabilitate key infrastructure, rebuild and strengthen institutions, and reinforce economic governance. Complementing the UN Multi-Partner Trust Fund and the World Bank Multi-Partner Fund as the two other Somalia Development and Reconstruction Facility funding windows. The Somalia Infrastructure Fund allows partners to channel funds efficiently and effectively towards Somalia's reconstruction and development, specifically transport, energy, water and sanitation, and ICT, as well as institutional capacity building and governance reforms in the areas of public financial management and domestic resource mobilization. A recent independent evaluation of the Somalia Infrastructure Fund confirmed the importance of the fund as a peace-building and state-building instrument and provided several recommendations, including the need to scale up resource mobilization. The bank also supports the African Legal Support Facility. This is another illustration, which has been providing advisory services since 2008 to ensure transparency and optimization of benefits from natural resources through improved contract terms. This type of financing is crucial to contribute towards peace building and consolidation, and also prevention, given the role that mismanagement of natural resources play as a driver of conflict in most fragile settings. These are concrete examples of applied partnerships that work and has worked. In a similar vein, we seek to explore synergies with the Peacebuilding Fund, and will continue our engagement with the Peacebuilding Support Office and the Fund to explore opportunities on the ground. Allow me to end my remarks on the criticality of partnerships for effective peace-building financing. Partnerships are critical to achieve impactful investments in fragile settings. And again, Frank has already mentioned this. In recognition of this, the African Development Bank will continue to to explore adapting its operational business model to build synergies with other development partners and strengthen complementarities between humanitarian development and peace building approach. That is to follow the triple nexus. These partnerships include regional member countries, the African Union, regional economic communities, and regional mechanisms and platforms, such as the G5 Sahel, Sahel Alliance, Lake Chad Basin Commission, the donor communities, the UN, and the international financial institutions like the World Bank and Islamic Development Bank. And of course, including civil society organizations and the private sector, to effectively support local and national peace building activities, including through enhanced coordination and complementary between the different funding sources. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Dr. Balde, for your presentation. I think there are some key points taken from both presentations that I can summarize. First, economic, social, and political instability can spread like a pandemic. COVID-19 exacerbated economic and political fragility. We need to step up our act. Partnerships are very important element. Mobilizing domestic resources is crucial for more sustainable financing. The important role that the private sector plays in securing financing, also addressing the root causes of fragility, supporting capacity building, the importance of dialogue with national authorities on economic reform. I think these were the key elements that were common between the two presentations. I thank you so much, Mr. Bousquet and Mr. Balde, for your presentations. And over to you, Ambassador Ahmed.
Thank you, Ambassador Khalil, and thank you to Frank Bousquet and Dr. Balde also for the very rich and valuable contributions to our discussions. Let us, without further delay, move to our next sequence regarding peacebuilding financing in peacekeeping and transition contexts, where we'll have a perspective from the missions. And I'll turn to my colleague, Yumna Al-Ba'li, the head of peacebuilding at the Cairo Center, who will be moderating that sequence. Over to you, Yumna.
Thank you, Ambassador Ahmed. Excellencies, esteemed panelists, we'll now move to our second panel on shared commitments, peacebuilding in transition contexts, as Ambassador Ahmed mentioned. In this panel, we are pleased to hear perspectives from the field on current efforts undertaken by UN peace operations in relation to financing peacebuilding activities in transition settings. I'm pleased to welcome to this panel Mr. Marco Kalbush, head of the Integrated Office at the United Nations Stabilization Mission in the Democratic Republic of Congo, MONUSCO, and Ms. Cara Johnson Molina, Senior Peacebuilding Officer at the United Nations Integrated Transition Assistance Mission in Sudan, UNITANS. We thank you for your participation in this panel and for your contribution to this important discussion. I will now start with Mr. Marco Kalbush. Mr. Kalbush, the gradual and phased drawdown of MONUSCO will require greater investment in maintaining and expanding strategic partnerships with various stakeholders, including with key donors and international financial institutions. What are the efforts of the Integrated Office in employing adequate and sustainable funding during the transition process? And what are the current and possible financing tools? Moreover, how can the mission optimize the use of projects financed through the Peacebuilding Fund as well as the Stabilization Coherence Fund? Mr. Kalbush, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Al-Bakli. Please allow me to join other speakers to thank the organizers, the Development Mission of Egypt, this CCCPA, and the ASWIN Forum for organizing this very interesting discussion. Thank you to the previous speakers for their very wise insights and their encouraging and also stimulating comments. I already in my notes, I'm sure we'll get back to some of them with some ideas and requests here from the DRC perspective. So thank you very much for facilitating that get together. As you know, the transition process in the DRC, or the UN's transition in the DRC, has started many years ago with a gradual reduction of troops of the peacekeeping operation, as well as increasing emphasis on joint initiatives to support stabilization, good governance, and other reforms. And the process has gained a real momentum since the 2018 elections and the peaceful transfer of power between President Kabila and President Tshisekedi. And most visibly, MONUSCO has really gradually reduced its footprint, closed several offices in provinces, and where the security situation had improved. So as we are now at this stage, we are basically only present in 4 provinces out of 26, whereas at the beginning of the UN's peacekeeping operation here under the name of MONUC, we were present all over the country. Now, the reality, unfortunately, is as well that transition from peacekeeping to peace building, as I like to call it, does not necessarily imply also an increase in funding that is commensurate with the reduction of troops, or with the economies made by the reduction of troops. However, we have received the support of legislative bodies to assess peacekeeping funding to support some joint initiatives between MONUSCO and the UN country team, which has been a fundamental change in the way that we also see and experience transition opportunities within multidimensional integrated peacekeeping operations. Very recently, we've developed a joint strategy that has now led to a joint transition plan, which was jointly developed, and that is, I think, a very important element, by the UN system. That means the mission and the UN country team on the one side, and the government of the DRC on the other side, in close consultations with bi- and multilateral partners, with civil society, with international NGOs, etc. And of course, very important, in close consultations and coordination with the IFIs. As you know, the World Bank is in parallel developing its own PRA with the government of the DRC. Now, that transition plan includes 18 benchmarks and related indicators whose achievements should guide and accompany the progressive drawdown of the mission and leading to a reconfiguration of the UN presence in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And I'm sure you've all seen that plan circulated as a Security Council document a few weeks ago as an annex to the SG report. Now, the next steps in that regard are the development of an action plan for the transition that is based on this common vision. And we're already working together to develop ideas for concrete actions with the UN country team that we will take into the transition context. And we will work with the government and technical and financial partners, as well as civil society and international NGOs, to realize these ideas and to bring them into the concrete action. And there, Dr. Baldi has mentioned it, the triple nexus plays a key role, because we cannot see the peacekeeping situation and the conflict as a standalone. We are still operating in a country with the second largest humanitarian crisis in the world after Yemen, and with a huge potential for development. And bringing that together under the triple nexus approach is very key, also in the way that we prepare and work on transition. And there, our partnerships with agencies, with the IFIs, and with donors are key. As an example, let me mention the Kasais, where we closed our office at the end of June 2021. We're already using now mixed funding resources to ensure continued progress towards peace building priorities. MONUSCO has maintained a residual presence co-located with the UN agencies, that is the UNDP and the UNICEF offices, and my office maintains a presence on the ground to facilitate coordination between the agencies, but also bringing in the other partners and this residual capacity that MONUSCO has kept in form of expertise, mainly in the field of justice and corrections. And we're working now with the colleagues in the Tanganyika province, which is the next province scheduled to close an office, to replicate that model, but also to learn from the lessons and to improve our performance there and address the challenges we were facing in the Kasais. And that brings me actually to the next point, because with that reduction of presence, of course, the agencies have stepped up their presence. For instance, the World Bank has opened an office in Kananga, in the capital of province of Kasai Central. UNDP, UNICEF are using core funds to increase their presence and their operations, and so to develop new programs. So a lot of the financial tools available are very well described in the excellent working paper that was shared by Eugene Chen with the participants here. So maybe I can just touch on some of them, if you allow me. First of all, the programmatic funds of MONUSCO. So for the past years, 3 years basically, we've had the possibility, as I mentioned earlier, to use programmatic funds for joint programs between the mission and the country team, mainly in the areas of justice, reform, of improving the penitentiary system, and reforming the national police. And these are developed, of course, together with the government and other partners, and are contributing to achieving the specific benchmarks of the transition plan that we have developed. At the same time, we're having a little bit of financial means for a bridging funding. Basically, when the mission withdraws from such areas, a lot of activities such as CDRs, smaller DDR projects are no longer possible. And the agencies do not necessarily have the means to step in right away. And so the mission has kept a minimum of bridge funds, programmatic bridge funds that we can use for that. And the Fifth Committee of the General Assembly has approved that, which I think is also a very important message to see this linear approach and this complementarity between the peacekeeping side and the peace building side where we are now. I've already mentioned the core funding of agencies, funds, and programs that contribute to their increased presence on the ground. And then there's one very important factor that should really not be underestimated. It is the Peace Building Fund. And ASG Fernandez Taranco has been a key player, and thank you very much to him. I didn't know it was his last week, so I'll take that opportunity for helping the DRC to be eligible for a second time for Peace Building Fund support. Very crucial in this political transition that the country is facing, but also in this transition that the UN system in the DRC is facing. The current PBF portfolio in the country includes 13 projects for an implementation of $29.2 million, as well as 6 new projects that are currently being developed with a focus on cross-border initiatives. And ASG Fernandez Taranco has underlined it, the risk of or the danger that conflicts can also impact neighboring countries. This is why we have developed 6 cross-border projects for a value of 14.4 million with the DRC's neighbors. And that represents a total of $43.6 million in PBF funding. And these funds have a very important catalytic effect. First of all, they make a substantial contribution to the transition process that is currently underway, but they also motivate donors to follow suit. And as we speak, the DSRG RCHC, David McLachlan-Carr, is currently conducting an ambassador-level mission to the Kasais, where key donors, key partners of the DRC are looking at the potential of investing in these provinces where the mission is no longer present. We recently had a similar mission to Tanganyika, and next month, the mission leadership will bring actually the heads of UN agencies to Tanganyika to prepare for that transition so that they also can adapt their programming to these new transition realities. Of course, you've mentioned it also, there is the Stabilization Coherence Fund under the I4S, another specific instrument here for the DRC, which helps supporting stabilization initiatives. Now, that fund is mainly focusing on the 3 eastern provinces, North and South Kivu, as well as Ituri, but it supports the different stabilization, peacebuilding initiative through 6 key functions: political engagement, coordination, provides thematic expertise. It does monitoring and evaluation, conducts capacity building of national actors, and of course, the management of the projects. Now, these fund is managed by the UNDP, by the UN Development Program, as the financial player, so to say, and by the mission, by MONUSCO on the substantive side. And so those 2 offices are working closely together, and we have the Stabilization Support Unit, which is basically a joint unit from MONUSCO and UNDP that works on the support of stabilization initiatives, also as a contribution to this long-term transition that the mission has been facing for several years. The fund has received $78 million since 2016, of which 98% have been funded already, or disbursed and funded or committed to 32 projects. And this year, we will have another $38.1 million in active programming. We're expecting additional commitments of donors of up to $10 million. Now, I've mentioned before, the World Bank has opened an office in the Kasais. The World Bank is a key player with large infrastructure projects, also to support peacebuilding. It is a key player also in smaller scale projects, for instance, in the Kasai region, for instance, in Tanganyika, to help communities, to help displaced people return to their communities, to help communities really strengthen their resilience and overcome the challenges of a post-conflict situation. The IMF, it has been presented by Mr. Franck Bousquet, has recently had a mission here just last week to work with the government on their fragile and conflict-affected states, and has, from what I understand, authorized additional drawing rights. Gabriel Leos, the IMF representative here in the DRC, is of course a key member of the UN country team, as well as is the World Bank. Now, how can we optimize the funds? Now, that's the interesting part. I think coordination is the key word. Coordination, collaboration, joint programming where possible. What many people may not know is that MONUSCO is an active partner in the UN SDCF and Sustainable Development Cooperation Framework. And a lot of MONUSCO's stabilization work, protection of civilian work is also is reflected in that framework, which means that we do have the tools available where the different actors can bring in their programmatic and their financial means to contribute to sustainable development, to stabilization in a way that has been agreed jointly with the government. And just this year, we will be reviewing the UN SDCF together with our government colleagues to adapt it to the new situation of MONUSCO's transition. We look forward to having more joint programs. We look forward to also addressing the impact of COVID-19. I mean, we're always joking, you know, COVID-19 is nothing compared to what we faced with Ebola, but actually it's not true. Ebola has always been very locally limited, and the socioeconomic impact of COVID-19, of course, in a country like the DRC is huge, and also affecting stability and security. So we really hope that we can strengthen geographical complementarity of our peacebuilding interventions through optimizing the territorial network of the PBF and the SCF, and also by creating more operational synergies on cross-border initiatives with the DRC's neighbors in the sensitive areas of Eastern DRC, where, at least for now, peacekeeping operations are still necessary to protect civilians under the Security Council mandate. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kalbush, for the enriching perspectives and insights. You've provided us with important points on the current situation on the ground and current developments within the mission in terms of the strategy, its 18 benchmarks, and the action plan to be developed. And I would like to thank you also for highlighting the mission's various financing instruments in terms of joint programs between the mission and the country team, and the programmatic bridge funds, the PBF, and the Stabilization Coherence Fund. Finally, thank you for highlighting different roles and different partnerships and different efforts in terms of coordination and joint programming, especially with the roles of the IMF and the World Bank increasing in the country. So thank you again. Last but not least, I would like to welcome Ms. Cara Molina, Senior Peacebuilding Officer at UNITAMS, as a key panelist in this discussion. Ms. Molina, the State Liaison Function, SLF, has been an innovative model in ensuring adequate financing for peacebuilding in the transition to UNITAMS. Can you share with us more insights on how UNITAMS sustained and built on UN peacebuilding efforts in Sudan, particularly through the SLF? And specifically, what are the best practices that emerged from this model? Finally, how can UNITAMS utilize the multi-partner trust fund of the Sudan financing platform to secure sustainable and flexible financing for long-term peacebuilding efforts? Ms. Molina, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the floor. So in the course of this briefing, I'll give a perspective from Sudan on the peacebuilding financing in both the peacekeeping and in the transition context. I will deliberately refrain from commenting on the current situation in Sudan, given the complexity of events in recent days. And in order to set the scene for the discussion, I'd like to basically just recap a little bit about the SLF, what they were, for the audience that may or may not be familiar, in order to lead us into the direction that peace building has taken with the establishment of UNITAMS. So basically, if we look back to 2018, Security Council resolution and resolution 2429 directed UNITAMS to draw down its operations in Darfur with a view to a potential exit in June of 2020. At that same time, the troop footprint was reduced by 54%, and the troop withdrew into the wider Jebel Mara from the entirety of the 5 states of Darfur. At that time, the Council also requested the UNCT to work with the peacekeeping mission in order to support what was known at the time as a whole of transition concept. We refer to it as the state liaison functions, with a view to the UN country team operationalizing programming in support of the mission mandate. In effect, what we saw happening in early 2019 as a result of that Security Council decision was the creation of a joint analysis, planning and delivery mechanism for programming towards a mission's mandate. It was the first time, I think, in the history of the UN that this had been undertaken on such a scale. And in its first year, we saw $32.2 million expended. And then throughout the total of the SLF programs, a total of 45 million. Now, the efforts were sustained in 4 key areas. And I'll just summarize them: livelihood, law, human rights, and at the request of the government of Sudan, on immediate service delivery. The programming was implemented in 6-month tranches, so that planning was operationalized in accordance to that, so that it was a rather short-term financing that was guaranteed before, and the ACABQ, or the 5th committee, made the next decision as to what to allocate in the next funding cycle. Now, if I could just speak from the perspective of somebody that was on the ground at the time during the design of the SLF, I would agree with the previous speaker that we over-focus perhaps on SLF, and there needs to be more credit given to the PDF in terms of sustaining peacebuilding gains. So while we have a tendency to focus on the $45.5 million that has been delivered through the SLF, we had during the same period of time, 32 million coming in the peacebuilding fund that had a longer term perspective that was more conducive to joint programming. Now, what were the SLF programs? They were basically UNAMID contracting 10 agencies, funds and programs to deliver basically 4 different categories of programs as outlined, but that focused on key drivers of conflict, namely the land issue, IDP and refugee returns, so focusing on areas with limited infrastructure, services and livelihoods, and areas where there was a scarcity of resources. They were critical because, given UNAMID's non-integrated mission, they allowed for the UN country team to build up its presence very quickly in areas of Darfur where we had hitherto not had the presence. It also allowed us to work collectively with the peacekeeping mission to design programming, thus building on the lessons learned, the political and analytical capacity that the mission could bring to bear in that programmatic design. Now, unfortunately, and I've said this already, funding was unpredictable. It was in 6-month cycles, and those who are aware about the programmatic approach will be very aware that this is not sufficient in order to design programming of any magnitude, and that it's certainly not sufficient in order to sustain peace building gains. In an ideal world, were we to redo this with similar funding sizes, this would then be allocated with 12 months foreseeable, with more foreseeable financing, and in such a way that the UNCT could build up and retain a presence in the parts of the country where it had hitherto not been present. Now, one of the key regrets, I think, that I have as somebody on the ground with the termination of the UNAMID mandate was that there was no provision made for sustaining peace. We had no possibility of continuing assessed funding into the peace building mandate for all the reasons that our previous speakers have outlined. And as a result, the SLF financing, although it did continue until April 2021, has come to an abrupt halt. To give you an example of what that translates to, in Darfur, we've seen a 49% in agency fund and program staffing, and we've seen a huge reduction in peace building programming as a result. Now, and I just would caveat this by saying that I was part of the advanced team looking at the design of the UNITAM's mandate, and it was always our intention to build on the lessons learned from the UNAMID state liaison functions in designing the mission. Hence, we have, I think, part of the reason that we had the Security Council was presented with a model that included integrated program modality with agency funds and programs, then delivering to the mandate. Now, regrettably, UNITAMS does not have within its financial resources a capability to deliver peace building programming. We have no funding whatsoever for programming. The result has been that even though we attempted to create a financing modality for peace building in the form of a multi-partner trust fund, that fund has not had the desired impact because member states are not channeling funding through it. So 10 months into the mandate, we have a trust fund which has $8.9 million in it, and financing needs which are close to almost possibly for the duration of the transition 100 times that. Now, so we have a financing model that is premised on voluntary funding from member states in order to pursue the mandated objectives outlined in the Security Council resolution without any secure financing in order to kickstart that debate. In terms of lessons learned, I think what peace building missions like UNITAMS would need is a secure assessed funding in order to kickstart mandate delivery and encourage member states in order to channel funding through the mechanism. And we would also need the peace building fund to channel funding through the MPTF in order to show confidence from within the UN that this is a viable mechanism that should be used. Both of those options still remain on the table as the way forward, but would need to be considered. I'll just take an opportunity to step back and look at the MPTF that was created with the establishment of the UNITAMS mandate. The MPTF itself was created in December 2020. It basically created a modality, and there has been subsequently the development of a programmatic framework for all the key areas or the 4 pillars of UNITAM's mandate: implementation, political transition programming, peace implementation, peace processes. The third area is peace building, rule of law, and protection of civilians. And the fourth area comprises the mobilization of economic assistance. That is an area where we work very closely with World Bank and others. Now, from a financing perspective, the UNITAM's UN mission worked very closely in the first half of this year to develop an integrated programmatic framework to support mandate delivery designing a results framework that included the benchmarks at the end of the transition period, so that we have a very robust programmatic framework that now needs financing. Unless we are able to generate the kind of resources that should be given to UNITAMS in order to deliver the mandate, it is unlikely that we would have the wherewithal to do that. I would recommend that perhaps the United Nations looks at how missions such as UNITAMS can better mobilize Security Council members to be advocates for such funding and explore modalities by which we can generate, together perhaps with the World Bank, some of the financing necessary to fund a transition. So that is some. I'm happy to answer questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Molina, for your insights. I would like to particularly emphasize what you mentioned on the role of the PBF and give it some credit, like you said, in terms of allocating funding along with the funding you had from the SLF. And also thank you for outlining the challenges created as a result of the mission's transition in terms of the huge reduction in programmatic funding, but also the challenge of the Peacebuilding Multi-Partner Trust Fund, that the fund has not had the desired impact. So thank you for that again. Excellencies, we now move to the final session of this important event. We will open the floor for participants to ask questions to the panelists and share comments and remarks. But I would like to know that all participants will be disconnected for a second and then reconnected automatically in order to have access to speak at the open discussion. I will now give the floor to Ambassador Ahmed Abdul Latif to facilitate the open discussion. Ambassador Ahmed, over to you. Sir, you're on mute, sir.
Apologies. Thank you, Yumna, and thank you very much to our two speakers from respectively MONUSCO and UNITAMS. Fascinating interventions. I personally learned a lot also about the situation, the challenges faced in terms of financing peace building in these missions. And very enriching contributions. Thank you so much. As Yumna mentioned, we will be moving now to the open discussion, and we will be taking a number of speakers who already have manifested their desire to take the floor. And I think the first one is Her Excellency, the Permanent Representative of Germany. I would like to give to you the floor, Ambassador, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. And of course, we welcome the Egyptian initiative as Germans to discuss the future of peace-building financing. And we think it's a very important issue. I would like first to thank all the other speakers that spoke before me for the great input on the many options to increase peace-building financing in transitions and beyond. We think that peace-building initiatives via the Peacebuilding Fund can play a very important role, facilitating an accompanying role in the peacekeeping and transition contexts. And this requires, of course, a close coordination, clear division of tasks. As you know, Germany is a strong supporter of UN peacebuilding and the largest contributor to the Peacebuilding Fund and a staunch advocate for the central role of the Peacebuilding Commission. I very much agree that the financing gaps for peace building need to be bridged. For this purpose, we organized a high-level roundtable on innovative financing for peace in May that did my predecessor, Christoph Heusken. And over the summer, together with the UN and other partners, we launched a study. We will share first results very soon on this study. And the logic is, in order to build the basis for all this, we are also actively developing impact assessment of PBF projects. For only the proven effective use of resources in PBF projects can attract new financing. We have to convince the financiers that this is an effective method to help and to achieve the goals we all share. And of course, we will remain actively engaged with UN Secretariat, the PBC members and other partners on this central issue in preparation for the General Assembly high-level debate on peace-building financing in spring 2022. This is our kind of next step where we can move things forward. I thank you very much for the attention.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, for this overview and remarks of the efforts by Germany, particularly to bridge the gap on financing of peace building. Thank you very much. Let me now give the floor to representative of Switzerland, Deputy Director General Christine Lowe. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. And on behalf of Switzerland, I would like to thank the government of Egypt for providing this opportunity for an exchange on this very important topic. And also thank you to the panelists for their very useful presentations. As one of the main contributors to the Peacebuilding Fund, and as a country with a long-standing tradition in peacebuilding and peacemaking, we couldn't agree more with the need to sufficiently and predictably provide financing for peacebuilding. Switzerland was able to expand its voluntary contributions to the PBF by enhancing cross-pillar funding at the national level, including development, humanitarian, human rights, and peacebuilding budgets. This follows the recognition that peacebuilding is in the interest and the duty of all partners in international cooperation. We therefore call on other member states to consider pooling funds across budget lines to increase their contributions to peacebuilding. We would also like to welcome recommendations made in the study, in particular the recommendation to establish clarity on the types of activities funded by different mechanisms. In fact, for the past years, Switzerland has been advocating for reducing the number of funds whenever possible. In terms of assessed contributions, we fully agree with the recommendation to operationalize access to assessed contributions by the PBF. As member states, we will have to collectively decide how we can support such efforts. Finally, we believe it is indispensable to expand the discussion on financing for peacebuilding towards innovative ways of financing. This could include private partnerships with the private sector or providing guidance on how private funds can engage in peace-positive investments. Such discussions do not question or undermine traditional ways of funding through voluntary or assessed contributions. But it's much more important to see that they would have the potential to improve the peace-positive impact of investments worth trillions of US dollars. I thank you very much.
Thank you very much for also your intervention and for the kind words about particularly the specific reference to the study and some of the recommendations that were made. Thank you very much. The next speaker on my list is His Excellency, the Deputy Permanent Representative of Morocco, Mr. Omar Kadiri, please.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. It's a pleasure to be among you today. It's a pleasure to see a lot of familiar faces as Ambassador May. We worked together in the third committee some time ago. So thank you very much for organizing this meeting. Morocco is happy and proud to be part of this meeting. Morocco as a TCC, as a chair of the configuration of the peacebuilding configuration of the Central African Republic, but also as a contributor to the PBF, is proud to and happy to be here. Of course, we thank you. We thank Ambassador Oussama Abdel Khaliq as chair of the Peacebuilding Commission, and we really salute the leadership of Egypt at the helm of the Commission. As a fellow African country, we are proud of what Egypt is doing at the helm of the PBC, but also on peace building in general. Of course, we thank you, our Egyptian colleagues from the S1 Forum, as well as from the Cairo International Center for Conflict Resolution, Peacekeeping and Peacebuilding. I think Egypt has been playing a very strong leadership on these issues, and we thank you for that. I will just make a few remarks based on the interventions that were made this morning. Of course, as we start the decade of action for sustainable development with challenging circumstances imposed by the COVID-19, mobilizing adequate resources to safeguard development and peace gains achieved so far have become more pressing than ever. So as achieving development in itself is a cornerstone for sustaining peace, we continue to believe that the diversification of financial resources is paramount, ensuring predictable, durable, adequate financing to assist countries to build and sustain peace is more than crucial, especially in the post-COVID era. The issue of assessed contribution and assessed funding was mentioned. As in 2018, when the SG presented his report, we fully, as Morocco, fully supported his recommendations. We continue to do so, And we do believe that assessed contribution for sustaining for peace building is important. The issue of partnerships was also mentioned, and we heard from our colleagues from the African Development Banks, from the other IFIs. So my delegation believe in the power of partnerships, not only in ensuring effective financing for peace building, but also in the need to leverage all ways of international cooperation, North-South, South-South, triangular cooperation, so to come up with adequate and required financial responses in full respect of national ownership and leadership of the concerned countries. Indeed, successful partnerships can act as a real sustaining peace measures as they help addressing critical gaps and prevent a relapse into conflicts. I would also like as a final point, the importance of the critical step in the peace continuum. Rather than handover of mandates, transition should be planned as a long-term, comprehensive, integrated, and collaborative response to the specific conditions in each country that requires continued coordination and support, in particular in settings marked by instability and uncertainty. Finally, we believe that the global context for financing for peace building in peacekeeping and transition contexts is significantly ripe to make a meaningful difference as we try to come out from the COVID pandemic, but also by leveraging the SG's A4P and A4P Plus initiative, the successful holding for this for his PBF replenishment conference early in January, his recent common agenda, as well as the upcoming high-level UNGA meeting on ensuring adequate financing for peace building. Thank you very much again, and we thank Egypt for the role it is playing in this regard. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your kind words. They're very well received, and you highlighted a number of important points, particularly on mobilizing assessed contributions for financing peace building, and also the issue of national ownership and leadership in peace building efforts. They're very important. Thank you so much. I'd like now give the floor to the next speaker, Excellency, the Permanent Representative of South Africa.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Abdel Latif. But I also want to recognize and thank my brother, Osama, and Egypt for this timely engagement. And please allow me to also take briefly this opportunity to thank Oscar for all that he has done for peace building in the UN system. And I think my brother Osama have really captured well how we all feel about the work that Oscar has done in the PBC. And I couldn't agree more with the sentiments expressed by Frank with regard to what Oscar has done outside with other partners around peace building. Coming back to today, I really wish to thank all the speakers. The inputs have been thought-provoking and very useful, and they provide well thought out options and possibilities for us to look at in terms of streamlining and utilizing better the limited resources that we are now aware of, and we are aware of the impact of COVID on those limited resources, and especially within the UN system, including now the decision of the SG around assessed contribution. So from providing information on the current landscape to outlining what IFIs are doing. I mean, it was very interesting listening to the African Development Bank and to IMF, and then to drilling down to the realities that are happening on the ground, UNITAMS and MONUSCO. I think this session has really been rich. So I have a question. So South Africa really believes in the private sector doing what it is supposed to do in terms of a contribution towards peace building. The private sector does benefit from peace, and therefore it must take its part. And having listened this morning, I heard a number of speakers talking about the role of private sector. And the question that I have now is that we all know that the private sector funding comes with expectations of return, and sometimes it's healthy returns that they're looking for. Any of the speakers, Dr. Abdel, can you give us one or two examples of where the private sector has been meaningfully engaged and has contributed to whether it's infrastructure development, but to peace building. And I would welcome those examples. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Thank you very much. And you raised an important question on the private sector that we can come back to after the round of comments. I think I have next on my list the representative of the United Kingdom. You have the floor.
Oh, thank you very much. Just trying to get the technology to work. So thank you very much to the Egyptian PR, the Aswan Forum, and the CCCPA for arranging and hosting this valuable meeting. It's been really rich discussion and so far, and the presentations are very, very welcome. I'd also like to take the opportunity to thank Oscar for all his valuable work in this area. The UK has been a long-standing donor to the Peacebuilding Fund, and we really appreciate his vision and efforts to make it what it is today, and look forward to continued engagement in that. Conflict prevention and resolution is a high priority for the UK. And I think because, as you've mentioned, as the speakers have mentioned, the increased fragility impacts on important areas such as development and human rights and trade. And so that's why we are continuing to support the Peacebuilding Fund and all the associated areas around that, including engaging in peacekeeping and so on and so forth. And other parts of it, the Humanitarian Development Peace Partnership facility, for example. But as my colleague from Germany said, it's really important as a peace-building community that we can demonstrate the impact of our existing investments and use this as an evidence-based influence resourcing decisions. I'm keen to help in any way we can do that as we build the momentum towards the meeting in the spring. And the UK is supportive of innovative methods to increase private financing for peace building, such as the potential for commercial peace bonds, and look forward to working with development finance institutions. And it's good to see Frank in his new incarnation, and I hope that that will make continuity into the IMF. We've seen his work with the World Bank and the difference that that has made. And I think that there's so much potential there, and really look forward to working with you on those issues. And then just finally, in considering future funding options, including the issue of assessed contributions, we believe it's crucial that we make sure they're effective from the start and ensure that all options are worked through in detail, and that the implications of any changes are really clearly explained and very well understood, and that we don't consider those options in isolation and look at all possible instruments in the round. So cautious but very interested in this area of work. So thank you very much for the opportunity to contribute to this really valuable discussion.
Thank you very much for your contribution and your remarks. Also well noted on impact assessment and the different options to be looked at in terms of financing of peace building alongside assessed contributions. I apologize to the representative of Sweden, who I think I was ahead of the UK. I wish to give the floor to the representative of Sweden, Ms. Jessica Olwason. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and I'm happy to have the British colleague starting. But first of all, thank you to the entire Egyptian team, Ambassador Abdel Latif, Ambassador Abdel Khalek, Deputy Assistant Foreign Minister Maya Khalilan, and also to Ms. Al-Bakli at CCCPA for you inviting us, hosting us, and moderating the conversation. An equally warm thank you to all the contributors and fellow colleagues who've been speaking before me. It's a genuine pleasure to attend on behalf of Sweden, and to do so from, I can tell you, rather grey and dull Stockholm. And particularly so perhaps because we have, of course, a very close partnership between CCCPA and Stockholm, including between the Aswan Forum and the Stockholm Forum for Peace and Development. Sweden is, since long, and as you know, quite heavily invested in UN peace building financially, politically, and to some extent, we hope conceptually. This includes our PBC membership and also our significant contribution to the PBF, but also to other relevant actors, be it UNDP, the World Bank, or some civil society organizations. So we really listened carefully and really appreciated the conversation this morning or afternoon, depending on where you connect from. It's been tremendously useful also the overviews, including from Dr. Chen. So based on that, a few very brief reflections. First, a couple of important points have really, of course, been made on the role of peacekeeping operations, including from the field, DRC and Sudan. And I can't help thinking that maybe we should perhaps see all peacekeeping operations as being in transition, and doing so would call for mandates flexible enough to focus on the wider objectives and not only the more specific tasks. I think we all agree that the importance of integrated, country-specific and context-specific and flexible transition planning can hardly be overstated, and that the planning for transition need to start well advanced of a foreseen drawdown. In all of this, of course, we need UN operations to be adequately resourced to be able to support this long-term stability and continuity of peace-building efforts. Second point, lasting peace needs to be inclusive, and that, of course, also goes for peacekeeping activities. Full, equal, and meaningful participation of women in political processes and peace processes is critical for success, and that, of course, also needs to be reflected in funding considerations. Thirdly, we feel that we perhaps need to remind ourselves and others about the basics, that we know that investing in prevention works, that it saves lives, and that it's cost effective. And in this context, the high-level meeting, which has been referred to by many, is of course critical, and we really hope that it can be fairly action-oriented in its outcome. The PBC will, needless to say, and as agreed, have an important role in preparing the meeting and presenting input for member states' considerations and discussions. And I hope that you, Chair, through this seminar or webinar, have found some important and inspiring points to help you guide that part of the preparations. Fourth and finally, I mean, the need for additional efforts to bridge the funding gap has for obvious reasons been a recurring theme during these past hours. And that's the reason for the Swedish Good Peace Building Financing Initiative, which some of you or many perhaps have heard of. It really sort of aims at improving peace building donorship to mobilize increasing volumes, including to the PBF, but also to ensure that funding at large is more long-term, more predictable, and more flexible. It also aims at improving the coordination and the partnership, which so many speakers have alluded to as being critical. Perhaps this initiative is more relevant for some of the traditional donors to relate to, but I also wanted to share it this afternoon or this morning with all of you to illustrate another one of the steps through which we are trying to contribute as Sweden, in addition to our own funding as such. With that, thank you, Chair, for taking the initiative, for bringing the key actors together, for, I think, challenging us to think a little bit better and do a little bit more. And rest assured that Sweden is more than ready to continue to be part of these efforts. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your intervention. And you know, as you mentioned, we're very happy to count Sweden as a strategic partner of the Aswan Forum, and its support has been very valuable in this partnership, and its work on peace building very important. And I'm happy you mentioned the initiative on good peace building financing. Thank you so much. Let me now give the floor to Her Excellency, the Permanent Representative of Bangladesh. Is Her Excellency there? If not, I'll give the floor to the Russian Federation.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for giving me the floor. I would like to thank Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Egypt, Egyptian mission here in New York to the United States, and Cairo International Center for Conflict Resolution, Peacekeeping and Peacebuilding for organizing such an important meeting. I also would like to thank all the panelists for informative interventions, as well as other colleagues from other missions. And I would like to share Russia's view on this important question. We think that the main phase of peace building process starts as the hostilities end, and the first months of that period are decisive for overcoming consequences of conflicts and preventing their recurrence. And in this regard, it is extremely important to ensure stable and predictable funding of the peace building initiatives in accordance with the needs of the host states. Peace operations can play a significant role at the early stages of post-conflict reconstruction. As UN peacekeeping evolves from classic ceasefire and disengagement missions to multidimensional operations with police and civilian components, more peacebuilding tasks are included in their mandates, such as assistance in strengthening the state institutions, security sector reform, and implementation of disarmament, demobilization, and reintegration programs. And in this regard, it is feasible to provide funds for early peace building initiatives in PKO's budgets. After all, only success of peace building process affects how the end of conflict and political settlements bring peaceful dividends in the form of sustainable social economic development, national reconciliation, and building a stable state. And of course, as the country's potential in maintaining peace and security develops, and with successful fulfilling of their main mandates tasks, peacekeeping missions should be promptly drawn down and transitioned into other formats of international assistance. And during transitions, it is important to preserve and effectively use logistics, equipment, and infrastructure remaining after the liquidation of PKOs, which may be transferred to the disposal of the UN development agencies or the authorities of the host country. At the later stages of peace building, it is important for the UN resident coordinators to increase the activities in terms of interaction between UN agencies to fully contribute to meeting the humanitarian and socio-economic needs of states. At the same time, international efforts should be built around the priorities of the host state without imposing unsolicited assistance or ready-made recipes. Also, potential of regional organizations seems to be the most suitable in terms of supporting national peace-building efforts, as they are better aware of the situation in their area of responsibility. We commend the relevant measures taken by the African Union, which provides all possible assistance to the states recovering from the conflict in cooperation with the UN, sub-regional organizations, NEPAD, and the African Development Bank. We look forward to the early launch of the AU Center for Post-Conflict Reconstruction and Development in Cairo, and securing stable and predictable funding for regional peacebuilding initiatives is key in achieving the Agenda 2063 goal of making Africa a peaceful and prosperous continent. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you very much for providing this perspective from Russia on this issue of financing of peace building and peacekeeping operations and transitions. Very much appreciated. I'll give now the floor to the representative of the United States. I understand they wanted to take also the floor. The United States. If not, I think there was the representative of Bangladesh wanted to come back.
Thank you, Ambassador, for giving me the floor. At the outset, I would like to thank Egypt for organizing this high-level panel discussion. Actually, we have had a very informative and productive discussion today. I will go direct to my questions. Like, smooth transition is often disrupted due to lack of adequate financing. assist contribution remains the most viable option for predictable and sustained financing for peace building. The Secretary General also provided multiple options for assist contribution. My question is how those options can be materialized for assist contribution. Thank you very much, Excellency.
Thank you very much for your question. I give now the floor to the representative of the United States, if you wish to take the floor. Thank you.
Thank you. The United States extends its appreciation to the chair of the Peacebuilding Commission, the Ambassador of Egypt, for convening today's important discussion. We are also grateful to all of the presenters for being with us today and for their remarks. We would like to thank in particular the President of the General Assembly, the AU High Representative for Financing the Union and the Peace Fund, and the Assistant Secretary General for Peacebuilding Support, Oscar Fernandez Taranco. As we noted during Friday's Peacebuilding Commission meeting on our common agenda, the PBC and the Peacebuilding Fund can be valuable tools to help inform UN and member state responses to multidimensional threats. The United States would like to take this important opportunity that today's meeting presents to convey that we are in the process of seeking funds to make a voluntary contribution to the Peacebuilding Fund. That said, while the United States fully supports the UN's extremely important role in peacebuilding, we believe that the assessed funding already provided for this work needs to be more effectively leveraged rather than increased at this time. UN member states already provide significant amounts of assessed funding for peacekeeping in excess of $6.5 billion annually, and for special political missions in excess of $700 million annually. We urge the UN to improve coordination between peacekeeping operations and special political missions, and to prioritize transition preparation during mission planning, rather than seeking additional member state contributions. As we noted recently in the Security Council, ahead of adoption of Resolution 2594, transitions from UN peacekeeping operations to follow-on presences where they are warranted are only successful if they are supported by committed and accountable host governments. Successful transitions show the best of what the UN can accomplish and honor the service of peacekeepers in these missions. But these transitions take real vision and long-term planning. The United States will continue to support UN peacebuilding efforts, and we hope that others, too, take concrete steps to support this vital work with a view to making the world a safer and more equitable place. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your statement. It's also well noted, particularly on the improving the use of assessed contributions, the current level of assessed contributions. Thank you. I'll now give the floor to the representative of the Netherlands. Floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much. And thank you very much for Egypt for this very important high-level panel discussion. And thank you, of course, to all the briefers as well for your very valuable input. We have two short points from our side. First of all, about financing for peace building. In addition to what others have said, the Kingdom of the Netherlands very much supports the assessment that adequate, predictable and sustained resources are crucial to meet current increasing needs. We therefore support the call for a dedicated amount to the Peacebuilding Fund from assessed contributions. And I'm sure that the very valuable presentation or the study that was presented today will guide us in our further discussions. Secondly, the shift from peacekeeping to peace building. We know that these transitions are a crucial and challenging endeavor. Missions undertake these transitions in close coordination with host nations, and we have seen that the closing and drawdown of missions can result in capability gaps, which put the sustainability and effectiveness of peacekeeping and peace building efforts at risk. We've seen that after missions drawdowns, a UN country team can be left with additional responsibilities, yet without the required capabilities to meet these tasks. And especially it was very interesting to hear today about the MONUSCO and UNITAM's challenges in this regard. To ensure the capabilities gaps that can happen after mission drawdowns, we must plan financially for transitions from peacekeeping to peace building. Timelines are of the essence here. And all in all, the Provision of adequate resources and timely planning are two aspects that need further sustained attention. This includes mission leadership, identifying benchmarks and financial needs that ensure successful transitions. A question, if times allow, of course, how would you assess current strategic oversight and or coherence when it comes to planning for transitions? Thank you very much, and thanks again for this very useful meeting.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, and also your statement is very well noted, and the questions you raised at the end. Thank you. Thank you very much. I think we had someone from a think tank or a researcher who also wanted to raise a question. I think Mr. Bing Yan.
Hi, thank you, Chair. Actually, it's Bing Yan from the Permanent Mission of China to the UN. Thank you for the floor. We just want to thank Egypt for organizing the panel and all the presenters. It is very substantive and interesting discussion. China has we support increasing investments in prevention and peace building. And China has supported multiple projects on preventive diplomacy and peace building through Peace and Development Trust Fund, and we will continue to do so. We encourage major donors could provide more. Oh, sorry, I have invitation to open the camera. Okay, we encourage major donors could provide more support for Peace Building Fund, and then Peace Building Commission could actively promote after conflict reconstruction in accordance with its mandate, the division of labor and its resources level. And once again, I just want to express our appreciation to Egypt for organizing this panel. It's been very useful. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Ms. Bing Yang. Apologies for the confusion. Thank you for the statement made on behalf of China.
Thank you.
Very well noted. Thank you so much, and for your kind words of appreciation. There was a couple of questions that are raised in the different interventions. I'm going to turn to the speakers and panelists if anyone wishes to address them. There was a question by Her Excellency the Ambassador of South Africa on examples of successful private sector involvement in peace building activities and financing of peace building. If there's any of the speakers who would like to address this in particular, we know that a lot of also the investment, for example, in infrastructure by the private sector connects to peace building. Is there any one of our speakers or Eugène who would like to address this? Or maybe from the different international financial institutions or multilateral development banks?
Maybe I can come on the issue of the private sector. That's the question, no?
Please, Dr. Balde, please.
Yes. No, I think, indeed, the private sector, is a very, very key player, and I can look at it from different levels. Now, in the case of the bank, I just ask a classic example. We looked at how we can really make sure that private sector is engaged at the community level. Because in terms of really resilience building at the level of the bank, we strongly believe that it should start from that community level. That's where most of the manifestations are, most of the conflicts are starting from there. So what we try to do is try to facilitate financial inclusion as one example. And that way we are able to make some meaningful impact by making sure that the vulnerable groups, vulnerable communities are engaged in meaningful wealth creation activities. A typical example would be the work that we are doing with the ICRC in the Sahel region, in those conflict hotspots in Mali, Chad, and also Niger. So this is just one example. But beyond that, also, if you look at it from a much more heavy investment time, we have invested a lot in terms of public-private partnership, in terms of restoring infrastructure in some of these conflict-affected affected countries. A typical example, again, would be Cote d'Ivoire. we invested a lot in terms of, their, socioeconomic development. We were with them from the time that they were really in a recovery phase, and use our multiple instruments, including the instruments that will catalyze private sector investment in a high-risk environment at the moment by using our de-risk instruments, and went into a lot of public-private partnerships that eventually helped, Cote d'Ivoire to exit out of fragility, and they're now in a very solid path to becoming, a lower middle-income country. So these are some of the investments that we are trying to make, and this experience is informing us in terms of really catalyzing private investment at the micro level through community interventions, but also looking at from the macro level by making sure you have meaningful investments that will change the whole environment, business and enabling environment as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Balde. Thank you for this very insightful intervention on the role of the private sector. I think there was also a question from the Netherlands on mission planning, on improving mission planning. I don't know if any of our colleagues and speakers from the missions or from the UN side would like to elaborate on this aspect. If not, there was also a question, I think, from Bangladesh on assessed contributions. I don't know if also there's any speaker who wishes to particularly comment on it.
I can speak on this one.
Eugene, go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I'd like to thank the speaker from Bangladesh for the question. The next opportunity to operationalize a funding stream from peacekeeping missions is in the spring during the Fifth Committee deliberations on the 2022 and 2023 peacekeeping budgets. The timing is actually very interesting because it should come on the heels of the high-level meeting of the General Assembly on peacebuilding financing. And of course, the paper that was presented shares some precedents that the General Assembly and the Fifth Committee can potentially draw upon to introduce a funding stream from peacekeeping missions to operationalize the Secretary General's proposal. Another opportunity, of course, comes next fall when the 2023 program budget is considered. But that's also an opportunity if the General Assembly decides they want to look at a standalone mechanism that's disconnected from the peacekeeping or special political mission budgets. They can also look at vehicles there. Maybe I might also make a little comment on mission planning. Given that one of my previous roles was actually as a deputy coordinator for the liquidation of the peacekeeping mission in Haiti when I was still in the Secretariat. One of the big challenges is that in a lot of the internal planning processes in the UN for mission drawdown and mission startup are actually separate. And there needs to be a lot more done to kind of draw a lot of these strands together so that mission drawdown and closure, including both the substantive and the kind of the more support components, are looked at in a more cohesive manner with the requirements for mission startup, including the possibility of having joint teams work on them, not just at headquarters, but also in the field. This would also help address a lot of the challenges related to ensuring that there's no gaps in either substantive or support activities, to make sure that resource requests take into account, the types of equipment and resources that are actually available on the ground. A lot of other considerations like that, which have, in practice, proven difficult to operationalize at times because of how a lot of the processes have traditionally been treated as separate parallel streams rather than one cohesive stream. Thank you. Over.
Thank you so much, Eugene, for very precise answers on the opportunities on the assessed contributions and also on mission planning. Thank you so much. As we're coming a bit wrapping up this very interesting and rich discussions with very rich contributions and stimulating interventions, I'd like to give the floor to Ambassador Osama Abdelkhalek, the Premier Representative of Egypt and Chair of the Peacebuilding Commission. Over to you, Ambassador.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Just few takeaways and inputs from myself here in New York. I'm extremely happy as the chair of the PBT with the very rich discussions we have had today, the very rich briefings. I believe we have achieved the target. You know, we were trying at the end of the day to have a very valid input in the circles of the PBC to prepare an advisory opinion for submission to the PGA while preparing for the high-level meeting on peace building, financing, and so on later next year. As well, I think that we have debated a lot. We have improved our common understanding of all the dynamics related to access to better and more predictable finance to peace building activities. And here, I want to say that it fits the purpose perfectly, since we have just been acquainted with the release of the common agenda. The SG has came a very long way in the new agenda for peace. We have convened as the PBC last week a very interesting briefing session with the SG himself. We have listened to his views, and we have seen that he has generated a lot of ideas corresponding to what we have been saying today, how to have a better access to assessed contributions to avail more predictable funding to peace building activities. This is like a dream coming true, and that's why the debates we have had today and the discussions, I would assume has fitted the purpose perfectly, and so on. A very minor reflection as well on that issue of the private sector and where it fits in that equation. I would tend to say that 100% the private sector continues to be a very important stakeholder. It should be part and parcel of the discussions we have, how to have the financing and so on. But I don't see the private sector right away from the initial phases being with us. It looks a bit like odd, you know. If we give the example, if we're speaking about power generation and power distribution, so now we should focus on whom are ready to invest in power generation. Later on in the power distribution or whatever, when it comes to revenue generation and so on, we would have a space and an niche for the private sector, but not at the earlier phases, because the whole philosophy of entrepreneurship is a bit different than what we're trying to do, assisting countries in transition and so on. I don't see any reason why they would find interest as private sector to come at the earlier stage. I would assume they will be part, giving inputs and so on. How do we see the successes? How do we see the whole setup functioning and so on? And that would help us laying a solid foundation for success. This is what I wanted to say. I'm extremely grateful for all the distinguished participants, the distinguished ambassadors. I don't want to forget anyone. Ambassadors of Germany, South Africa, the DPR of Morocco, all the distinguished participants from capitals, from Stockholm and elsewhere, and all the colleagues participating here in New York. I'm happy with the level of participation, dedication, and the depth within which they have dealt with the whole issue. Pretty much happy with all the discussions, and I give a lot of credit for the success of that event to you personally, Ambassador Abdel Latif, and the CCCPA and Ambassador May in Cairo, working with the distinguished panelists, whom we're very grateful to for their very rich inputs and briefings, and we're totally indebted for them to that end. Over to you, Ambassador. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Your Excellency. Thank you so much. I think you have already kind of brought together the main takeaways of these discussions, and we're very happy that this event fulfilled its purpose of being useful to highlight some ideas, some key messages around and options around the financing of peace building at this very timely juncture. As you mentioned, I think there's a recognition that the needs are much vaster than the actual resources. The landscape is fragmented, and there's a number of options and recommendations to take forward, to increase financing for peace building and to rationalize it, mainstreaming to ensure adequate and sustained financing for peace building. And I think we're very happy that the paper that Eugene prepared was well received from the different interventions and the panelists, and we want to thank him for his also important contribution he has made, as well as all our distinguished panelists and speakers who have taken their valuable time to be with us. This is a conversation that will continue to be ongoing, and will be continue to be engaged in it from the perspective of the Aswan Forum. The lessons learned here and the key takeaways will be brought together in a summary that will be provided in the context of the preparations of the Aswan Forum. And I would like to thank again all of your contributions that will feed into that important exercise, as well as to thank the strategic partners who have announced their partnership already with the 3rd edition of the Aswan Forum, in particular the government of Japan and the African Development Bank. Let me also finally thank you also, Ambassador Abdel Khaled, and the Permanent Mission of Egypt for all the support in organizing this, Ambassador May Khalil in Cairo at the Foreign Office, my colleagues at the Cairo Peacekeeping Center, Yumna, Noran, logistics, who have done an incredible job in pulling this together. I also would like to join previous interventions in paying tribute to Assistant Secretary General Oscar Fernandez Taranco, who has been a strong supporter and friend of the Aswan Forum, including participating in its 1st edition and 2nd edition, and we look forward to continue to work with the different partners represented here today, whether it's the African Development Bank, the IMF, the UN, the Peace Building Fund, the missions, as we take this ahead to the Aswan Forum. And finally, also maybe just to flag that we are taking this conversation we did not mention a lot climate change today, and we will, as CCCPA will be hosting on the 4th of November, in the context of Geneva Peace Week, another very interesting meeting on harnessing climate finance for sustaining peace, which is also a very interesting dimension of this discussion, particularly as the COP will be taking place in Glasgow, and Egypt will be hosting the Conference of Parties next year on climate change. So thank you again, everyone, and thank you for being with us and for all your contributions. Thank you. Bye-bye.